everybody to this e-learning presentation. As you've noticed, you are muted, and you can type in any questions in the bot, well, wherever your bar is. It's at the bottom of mine in the Q&A box, and our presenters are going to go answer those questions as they come up. So today we have ANA Exhibit Judge Trainer Brett Irick and Chief Executive Judge Joseph Boling presenting the judges' familiarization, tongue-tied, and certification program. So gentlemen, I'm going to hand it over to you.
For those of you who are listening, we don't have the handouts to hand out, but if you want the handouts, which will include the new rating sheet and the guidance that goes with the new rating sheet, and the handout about why judges should consult. Now, if you don't consult, you can get really screwy results in first, second, and third. Just email me at that address and I will send you a copy. I'll also attach to it the National Money Show. All right, now I've lost it again. The program that we have that only has National Money Show exhibits. We don't do those exhibits at the summer show. National Coin Week. Okay, so why would you want to judge? Well, there are lots of reasons for judging. All of these pertain. Having read several hundred exhibits over the years, I know a lot more about numismatics than I would have ever learned if I hadn't been reading those exhibits. And presently, in last year's budget and this year's budget, the ANA board has allowed a $25,000 line of credit for the exhibiting program, from which we're buying the new medals, the bullion prizes that go with the traditional medals for the winners, and a 25% banquet ticket. So if the banquet ticket is priced at $100 for the general membership, the exhibitors and judges get it for $25. Now, how long that will stay in the budget remains to be seen, but it's in this year's budget again. So at the present time, you get your discounted banquet ticket. All right, the best exhibit judges have several qualities. The bottom line there is the most important of those. We insist that you read everything that's in the presentation that the exhibitor has prepared. Now, if there's stuff in there that the exhibitor did not prepare, such as if he's showing Metallic Art Company medals and there was an insert in the box with the medal that has a lot of information about the medal and about the sculptor, you don't need to read all of that because that wasn't prepared by the exhibitor, but you do need to read enough of it that any reference the exhibitor makes to that insert is legitimate, that you can find on the insert whatever it is the exhibitor wants you to be finding. If you either put an arrow to it or he tells you to look in the third paragraph and learn about the sculptor or whatever he wants to say about that insert, you have to at least track that. But you don't need to read the other material. Now, if the exhibitor has cut and pasted from other sources and doesn't give credit, but you recognize from the style that this isn't the exhibitor's work, then you have the comment to make about the plagiarism rule that we want to have credit for outside sources given. If you can't find a credit for it in the bibliography part of the exhibit or in the text proper, then you can make a comment about that, and in consultation with your other two judges, deduct however many points you think are appropriate. But otherwise,
adding modern technology, I've noticed that on a couple of exhibits, so I don't type 8 or 10 words into Google. Typically, I can find out what's been plagiarized, and I'll even make a note of that if necessary. case of some commemorative half dollars a few years ago. The descriptions of each of them were lifted directly from a text. And the only mention of it was in the bibliography at the end of the exhibit. So that exhibitor lost a significant number of points because he didn't point that out up front.
Took it straight off the NGC website, word for word.
Correct.
All right, you need your rating sheet and a pen and a pencil. The worksheet, which is the spreadsheet with the elements listed down the left side and room for 13 or 15 exhibits across horizontally, and the clipboard or anything else that you want to use to support those while you're working on them. As you're reading the exhibit, you're going to be using a rating sheet, but you're not going to be putting any numbers on that. Your numbers are going to go on the worksheet when you start getting numbers assigned. Now, what are your odds of being certified? Well, of course, this doesn't pertain to this particular session because we're not going to be certifying anybody from this session since there's going to be no practice judging being done. But we do welcome everybody to the program whenever we present it. This is always presented at every ANA convention and frequently presented at other regional conventions around the country. The last two were at PAN last October and Michigan State in November. FUN did not have it this year. They do it all in alternate years. So next year's FUN will have a judges familiarization certification program run in conjunction with the convention.
However, if you're a new exhibitor or even an experienced exhibitor, even if you have no interest in judging, we strongly encourage that this be part of your exhibit building toolbox, because if you don't know how your exhibit's going to be scored and what we look for, you don't have all the tools you need to develop a strong exhibit. So if you're an exhibitor only, we encourage you to at least work through the slideshow program so you know exactly how to get the strongest total number of points for your exhibit that is capable of.
All right, that second sentence there, yours may be included, of course, never applies to live floor judging at a convention. This is directed toward apprentices, and apprentices frequently try to certify in the class that they normally exhibit in, and they may have an exhibit at that convention. So we get to see how objective the apprentice can be about his or her own exhibit. But the point is that you're going to find all of the exhibits. First off, make sure you know where they all are. You should have a rating sheet for each exhibit. And some of them may be misplaced in the hall due to various contingencies during setup. And this is the point where you just walk up and down the aisle and look and see which one's the exhibit that makes you stop in your tracks and turn and look at it. Then, after you found them all, you do this reading word for word, every word that the exhibitor has prepared in each exhibit. And as you go through that, anytime you have a comment to make it on the rating sheet. Make sure you have the proper rating sheet under your pen and make the comment on the rating sheet. If the question gets answered later in the exhibit, then you can make a comment, well, you should have told me this in case 2 rather than waiting until case 5. Don't put any numbers down anywhere right at the moment until you get all through the exhibit. For questions about anything in the exhibit that you're unsure about, find somebody who can help you. The same that floor judges do when they're judging exhibits. If they found a statement that none of the 3 of them is accurate, then go find somebody at the convention who can assist with that. As apprentices, They can all do that, but what they can't do is consult with anybody else about scoring and comments, because we want to see their own individual work. When you get all finished with reading the last case, then go through the comments, make sure the comments are all still germane, make any additional comments you want to make, and assign numbers for each of those criteria on the spreadsheet, not on the rating sheet that's going to go back to the exhibitor. That doesn't get numbers put on it until after you have your judges conference. Total the scores after you've read all of the exhibits. We don't want you to say, well, all right, that one got a 93. What am I going to give this next one? We want each exhibit's total to be arrived at independently of knowing what the other exhibits' totals were. So, but when you do add up scores, then look and see, do those totals give a first, second, and third, which agree with what your gut said as you were reading through the exhibits? And if they don't agree with what your gut said, then figure out why not. Did you underscore one exhibit that should have gotten more, or did you overscore an exhibit inadvertently? Make sure, of course, that you're not giving 15 points on a 10-point criterion or 10 points on a 5-point criterion. Then meet with the judging team and try to agree on first, second, third. We don't insist that you have to agree on first, second, third, but it makes it a lot easier in the chief judge's process if the 3 judges agree on the placement. And the reason we want to have ties broken down to 5 places is that some of the classes are congruent with YN classes. And if the class is congruent, we can look at the scores and get the YN placement if you've broken ties down to that level. Now, this means that you not only have to make sure that your individual scores on these however many exhibits are in the class have no ties above 5th place, but when all 3 of you are added together, the team leader for the team has to add the scores and make sure that there are no ties resulting from little minor differences in the score that each individual judge gave the exhibits. Because again, if it comes into the chief judge's room with a tie for the aggregate, then somebody has to go out and look at those exhibits and break that tie. Now you transfer the individual numbers to the rating sheet that's going to go back to the exhibitor. And again, make certain sure that you're writing on the proper exhibit rating sheet. It doesn't happen every year, but it happens too frequently that we get really funny results in the chief judge's processing, and going back and looking at the spreadsheets which were turned in, we find out that the spreadsheet was copied onto the wrong rating sheet, which is why we like to have the spreadsheets turned in, because it gives us a backup to use, so we don't have to go pull you out of the Tams banquet or you know, some other way find out why these results don't seem to be in sync with the other 2 judges.
So why is the pen being shown in the lower right-hand corner? The scores on the rating sheet are always entered in ink, not pencil. So that makes it tamper-proof. Because after all, that is going back to the exhibitor. And the other reason you want to be really careful to make sure you're writing the right scores, and as an exhibitor can express displeasure with seeing changes on the final rating sheet. That's why you only put the score in after the dust is settled on the worksheet, where you're using a pencil and adjusting up and down as you're reaching your consensus. A good exhibit chairman will have blank rating sheets, so if you do manage to get the wrong numbers on a sheet, sadly, we like you to start over so we don't have markups.
All right, this is a slide that shows typical ranges. And this slide was built after the degree of difficulty criterion was introduced, which reduced scores considerably. It predates the change that we had for what, about 4 years, where we had the rarity scale to be used to award rarity points with a 10-point criterion, which reduced scores considerably as well if it was applied the way we wanted it applied. But one of the changes that we've made this year is that rating score, that table has been changed, and it's now only a 5-point criterion instead of 10. So these should still be reasonably accurate in terms of what place you can end up in. So you can have a score in the 80s and it'll still be a first place score in a tough class. Some conventions, some regional organizations specify thresholds for first, seconds, and thirds. So if you're judging at Michigan State or some other convention that has such a threshold, make sure you know what those are before you go in, because if you really want to give a first place and it is below their threshold, then you need to figure out how to jiggle the scores a little bit to accommodate that threshold.
Yeah, for instance, on Michigan State, to get it first, you have to score at least an 80. Second place, I believe, is a 75, and third is something like 70.
This usually comes into place for those lower. The first place
Yeah,
isn't
so
usually, but second and third can be.
and anytime you judge for an organization, take a look at the rules. If the rules aren't on the website, ask their exhibit official to have a look at a copy of them, and they may say our rules are the same as the ANA, and that's happy days. But all the regional organizations that I'm aware of have slightly different rules, and it's not going to affect your work very much, except for the score required to get a first place, second place, or third place. And what I can say is I've developed an exhibit which has been improved since Michigan State, that I would score in the low 90s myself, and that's exactly where it scored at Florida, and that was enough to get a best of show this year. 95 to 100, I think I've seen a total of 3 exhibits in 20 years that would get into that range, and then you have to question why you're getting to that high of a number, and that's usually exceptional work. You just got one best to show anywhere it's shown. Getting to a 85 is exceptional. This is not a high school exercise or a grade school exercise. It's I would say it's more of an adult rating skill, and if you get above about a 75, you've done a pretty decent job, especially if you're a junior exhibitor. One thing we do try to do is never get a score below a 60 unless, and even if it requires some juggling, because it may be a junior that's mixed in with adults. It may be a less seasoned exhibitor. What we want to do is not give them such a low number they become frustrated and walk away from exhibiting altogether.
At ANA, we do have YNs mixed in with adults because the YNs are eligible to win the open awards, and they're not indicated in any way in the hall that it's a YN exhibit. There's nothing on the label. There's nothing on the rating sheet that says this exhibit belongs to a YN. And sometimes judges are deceived. They think they're reading a YN exhibit, and they really aren't. They're reading an exhibit from an inexperienced exhibitor who doesn't really know his way around the process yet. All right, let's talk about the individual points. The rules say something about the title being in the first case, but sometimes the first case is only a portrait or something like that. it may have no text in it whatsoever, it may just have the title without any text. Make allowances for that kind of artistic approach. But the title has to be something that you can find. I've seen titles down in the lower corners. I've seen titles in very small fonts. I've seen titles, pretty much any way you can think of, which didn't fulfill their function, which is to tell you a little bit about what this exhibit is going to cover. And then following that is the scope statement. Back in the bad old days, ANA had no provision for a scope statement. The title had to define the exhibit in terms of its completeness. So you had very long, convoluted titles. But since we now have a provision for a scope statement, you don't have to have those great long titles, which are going to define the scope. The scope statement itself will do that. And if there is no scope statement.
Yeah, and typically, I like to see titles that are no more than 8 or 10 words, because otherwise it kind of becomes a slog to understand what's happening. And most good exhibitors are usually at 8 words or less. This rating element's one of 11 elements. 75 points relate to how well the exhibitors researched and presented their material. The other 25 points relate to the material itself. So the next slide, we start talking about where do we start for something that's kind of average or common, and I'll hand it back to Joe.
Well, we established start points for each criterion several years ago, and when those were introduced, a lot of judges said that's really helpful. That it gives me a place to ground myself in on that criterion. And the reason we don't start at the top is so that we have room to reward the really good exhibits. So if the title and scope is inadequate in any way, it's not going to get 5 points. And if it does everything that you expect it to do, then give it the 5 points. If there is no scope statement at all, and you're left at sea wondering what is this exhibit really going to get to, you may have to come back to this later on and say, well, you started with this approach, but you finished with that approach, and you didn't tell me what your real intention was. So therefore, you're going to lose some points up here on this first criterion. That happened at Pan this year. We had an exhibit that had no scope statement and started out talking about one subject, finished talking about a completely different subject. And it wasn't clear at all exactly what the exhibitor's intention was. Now, this pertains only to apprentices, and that is that they have to put some kind of comment and a score on every criterion, because we want to see, if they're giving max points, why are they giving max points? If they're, giving 14 on a 15-point criterion where the start point is 12, what is it that convinced them that it was worth more than the start point? And here are some examples of the kinds of comments that you might find. The white ones are positive comments, the yellow ones are negative comments. I don't know what color they're coming across on your screen. When I show this at conventions using a projector, those yellows turn into some other peculiar shade, but the point is the light ones at the top are the positives and the others are not. And these are just examples, nothing at all prescriptive about these. Basic Numis information. This is a change from previous years. This has always been a 15-point criterion. And we wanted to add a new criterion. We took 5 points off of this because this should be a walkover. There should not be any issue with getting the basic numismatic information presented. And in the green there, to the extent needed by the exhibit scope. So what we don't need to see is all kinds of technical detail about the material in an exhibit if that's not the point of the exhibit. If the scope is the influence of the Art Deco movement on designs of coins in the 1920s and 30s, then what are coins made out of, how heavy it is, what its diameter is, even what mint it was struck at, are not germane. They don't pertain to the scope of the exhibit. So putting those in and making a judge read all of that stuff when it's not necessary would have a tendency to irritate the judge a little bit. So the examples that are on the bottom, the last 4 lines, those are examples of things which could be germane. And if they are, they should be there. And we move bibliographic over into basic. It used to be in special. Bibliographic, starting this year, is under basic numis information.
You know, one of the items that you run into, particularly with ancient coins and some of the medieval coins, is your designer engraver are unknown and the miniatures are unknown. So I was looking at sheets at Florida. I saw where some judges were taking points off, even though the exhibitor said the designers and engraver are unknown. Unknown is unknown. And if you specialize in that type of material, and normally the engraver and designer aren't known, you shouldn't be taking points off for that. Menage, sometimes we don't know that. And sometimes a statement on state quarters, an exhibit of state quarters, which is somewhat popular among juniors, is enough information as these all were made in hundreds of millions. You don't have to put an individual table in with the miniatures. Save yourself time doing other research, and we reward that.
But if you're talking about foray coins among ancients, then composition becomes very significant.
Correct. As a judge, if you're a specialist in that, and they don't mention something that is available, then you take points off for it.
The start point on this 10-point element is 8 points. So if the presentation of the basic numismatic information, given the nature of the exhibit, is fully adequate, then give it 8 points. If it's better than adequate, if it shows evidence of research or other kinds of not normally known information about the basic numismatic characteristics of the material, then it gets better points. Now, these happen to all be negative comments. These are things that some exhibitor didn't include in the exhibit, which the judge thought were significant. Or in the case of the next to the bottom one there, not only not necessary, but not significant.
So one of the, a few years ago, there was an exhibit of bronze Roman Empire Caesar coins. And one of the comments that I wrote down was, how rare are these coins? Because he didn't say that they're all common. So the exhibitor went back and looked up the coins, and he came up to me really happy a few weeks later at the next convention. He said, I bought a coin for $300 that is a second, only the second one known, and the other one sold for $13,000. It happens. But research your own material, because sometimes you find out, or encourage the exhibitor to research their own material, because sometimes they find out they have something special.
Special numis is still at 15 points, and this is where you're addressing the public. This is not where you're addressing numismatists. The basic numis is addressing people who know what they're reading. Special numis is where the story gets told. So that's where the story begins to be told. We'll get to the crux of the story in the next criterion, which is the new criterion. So this is where you answer the questions of people who don't know a lot about the material. But, why is this story that I'm telling significant? And what can I add here that's going to make it interesting to you, the lay reader, to stay engaged long enough to read my entire exhibit? This is another 12-point start point. As I said, that's so that we can reward the really spectacular exhibits with 13, 14, 15 points. When you start at the top and work down, you have no place to reward the really great ones. And we want comments. The exhibitors always ask for comments, and we still have judges who write no comments. That's not acceptable. That's not helpful for the program.
And if we're working as head judge or as an exhibit chairman, we take a look at that and we give the judges feedback on that they're consistently not writing comments for the low scores, then suddenly they're not going to receive a judging assignment unless we have a shortage of judges.
They also don't get a bowling medal for excellence in judging.
That's the other grand prize in judging is Joe has endowed a medal that is given out annually to a judge that has displayed excellence in judging.
That medal started with the Goodfellows. The Goodfellows paid for the first several years of them, but when we ran out of them, and it happened to be just when my mother died, and I got a legacy that I was able to turn into having a medal designed and minted, and had 25 years worth of them made. And we were about 1/3 of the way through those already. Be interesting to see if it lasts beyond the 25 years. This is the new criterion. This is where the story really gets down to where the rubber meets the road. Are you writing a story interesting enough to make a person interested in collecting this material? You can talk about all the different ways that you can collect this kind of material. People who were brought up on penny boards don't think of other approaches to collecting cents. They only think of mint date and mint mark and nothing else. But there's lots of other things you can do with mundane material, including state quarters. So, how do you want to collect this to make it interesting to you, the exhibitor, and potentially interested to you, the other fellow reading the exhibit? Interesting enough to make the reader want to know more about the material.
This is another element where we start with 8 points and we add or deduct based on whether you feel the exhibitor's story's interesting enough to pull you through the whole exhibit, not just take a glancing look at it and walk away. A couple of examples are, okay, this is the material that's being displayed, but a different way of doing it is the exhibitor states, I like this series of coins, but I've limited my purchases to coins that have been owned by famous numismatists. That's one way to handle it. And right now, there's a fair amount of experimentation going on because I think there's only about 10 exhibits where the exhibitors actually thought about how to maximize their scoring in this element.
So these are comments that I dreamed up because this criterion had never been used when we first introduced this. So we didn't have any way to know what kinds of comments we're going to be seeing on this criterion. So these are things that I thought of that might be germane to inspiration and education. And issues there in the first line doesn't mean emissions, it means the political problems of the times.
So a good exhibitor will put you into the mood of the era. Say, okay, these coins were issued in this country at this time, and this is what's going on in that region or country or territory. If you don't put the exhibitor in the mood, typically it's going to beg the question, okay, what was the environment these things were being used in? And that's going to cause you to lose a fair number of points very quickly.
Now, this originally was just presentation, but several years ago, it's actually getting to be many years ago now, at one of our exhibit committee meetings, Simka Karitsky brought up that the way that the exhibitor is looking at the material could be creative and original. Therefore, there should be some points awarded for that. And we expanded this then to be not just presentation, that is the physical layout and prettiness of the exhibit, but also the concept behind the exhibit. Sam Deep decided when he built this slide set that 7 points was a good place to start on creativity and originality, and we have not changed that. It seems a little bit odd that all the other 10-point criteria start at 8 points, but this one starts at 7. An example of this was in Charlotte, 2 Charlottes ago. There was an exhibit on Caribbean coinage, and it was coins on a beach. The case was full of sand, and the coins were actually in the sand. That was creative and original. I'd never seen anything like that before or since. I wouldn't want to be the person who had to clean that case after the convention was over. And it turned out to be a YN exhibit. You know, nobody knew that going in, but this YN decided he was going to build a beach and bury his coins on the beach. And it worked. It was very effective. Now, the train running through the cases has gotten to be pretty old by now, or the paddle wheeler going up and down the river. And the different horizontal levels, that was novel when it was introduced. It's not novel anymore. There is a novel way to show the backs of the coins. Can't remember his name now, out in Portland, worked for Intel, figured out a way to use prisms to show the reverses of coins right side up. So you don't have to look at a mirror image because he's not using a mirror, he's using a prism. And it works well no matter how the hall is lit. It's if you've ever run into one of those exhibits, you'll recognize immediately that it's a very effective way.
And I own the other exhibit. Yeah, I use a different type of prism than the gentleman in Portland. Sadly, his name escapes me also. We call that retroversion, and you have to have a high quality of optical glass so that it does work well in all lighting. The other thing you start seeing is dome magnifiers and also creative uses of mirrors, and usually that's novel enough that you perhaps see one of those types of exhibits once a year.
Now,
If you go to half a dozen shows.
The fellow in Portland is named Reinders, James Reinders. And his daughter, Katie Reinders, won YN Best of Show one year. So he passed on some of his exhibiting prowess to his daughter. By this point, she's probably over 30 years old. Okay, attractiveness. This is the criterion that makes a person who's strolling down the aisle stop and look. If it's not eye-catching enough to make a passerby stop and look, then it's failed, because you haven't transmitted the information that you want to interest the public in if the public doesn't stop and read the exhibit. And this is where you're going to get somebody to turn and look and become engaged. This is also where we're taking off the points for grammar, the things that are going to irritate a reader, because he's going to find a problem in the typography or the grammar, which is going to say, well, that could have been done better.
We ended the grammar and typographical errors here and took it away from basic and specialized numismatic information, because it was showing up here and in those two criterion. And not only did it cause some inconsistency in the spread between the low judge and the high judge, it also caused more discussion during a judge's consensus meeting. So since we moved grammar and typographic here about 5 years ago, that process has worked a lot more smoothly. And then I want to give an example of something that you need sunglasses for, and this is the topic was Byzantine chaos. So the exhibitor used some really wild colors, but it got the job done. It did stop people in their tracks. That one we gave extra points for attractiveness.
That was 2 New Yorks ago, and I can't remember the name of the exhibitor, and he is since deceased. But it was very effective, and it made the point. The coinage in the Byzantine period was very chaotic. And again, write the comments. You know, if there's something that's a problem, mention it. This is also where miscut cards, you know, badly cut cards, crooked cards, things like that get comments about.
These are exemplar comments. And when we talk about exhibits developed by a foreigner, if we're advised ahead of time, we make allowances, especially if English is not their first language. That's example number 1. Example number 2 is there's 2 forms of English. One's Oxford English, which is used pretty much everywhere in the world except the United States. And there's Webster's English. So what we ask judges to do is take a look at which one they're using, as long as they're consistent throughout the exhibit, except for things that are in quotations where it could be the opposite. Don't take any points off for that. So like, for instance, the word color has a bonus U in it in Oxford. And we do get the occasional Canadian exhibit in the United States where they will be using Oxford only.
The dingy appearance on the bottom line there is a result of showing exhibits over and over under these high-intensity arc lights that are used in convention centers. Don't ever show paper money with anything overlapping it, because if you do that 2 or 3 times, you're going to have a pattern burned on that paper money where the covered part is brighter and colors are somewhat different than the colors on the rest of the banknote. If you want to have the, you know, show your paper and suffer the degradation that it's going to acquire under those kinds of lights, at least let it be uniform all across the entire banknote. Don't put anything over one corner, which is going to leave that corner looking brighter when you've shown it 2 or 3 times.
The one description, back, the second from the bottom, the font size. We encourage exhibitors to never use anything smaller than 14. Because most of us exhibit judges were in the bifocal stage of life. Yeah, a lot of the public doesn't like to have to lean over to try to read 11 point, which is pretty standard these days, or 12 point. If you can easily read it without having to lean over, no points off, but otherwise you should take at least a point off if they're using small font, because it's very punishing to have to read that whole exhibit 2 inches from the glass.
And make the comment, you know, why would the point get taken away? Because it was too hard to read. Balance related to the exhibit scope. They can't get points for a rare item if the rare item has no business being in that exhibit. You know, even if it's unique, if it's just thrown in there to try to get points for rarity and doesn't have any relation to the story that was being told, then take off points for it. It's a distractor.
You know, an exemplary comment there was Joe and I were doing a certification class, and somebody had put pictures his father had taken during the battle for the Philippines, World War II, an exhibit that had nothing to do with the story that was being told about the Manila Mint. So we got involved, you know, so that caught our eye in not a good way. And then Joe and I decided, okay, some of the dates of the battles he mentioned aren't right. So by the time we were all done, I think we had 7 or 8 comments about wrong dates and sequence of events.
He subsequently built a different exhibit using those same illustrations, and they tied in very well. So he found a different way to use that family material in a way which was effective. Exhibiting is storytelling. We want to see the story being told. Some of the comments that have come from the new rating sheet in that education and inspiration criterion is that exhibitors are having a hard time dealing with that because it hasn't been in the criteria up until now. They're slowly starting to adjust to it. And one of the comments coming out of fun this year was, we need to put story, that word, in that criterion some way to drive the point home that we're wanting to see an effective story being told, and that's where we're going to be rating it.
That copy of that word story will be discussed in our next exhibit committee meeting coming up in Phoenix.
Balance doesn't have anything to do with the physical layout. It doesn't mean that you have to have you know, every case looking like every other case. Some judges are still making comments that indicate that they're looking at the way the exhibit looks as balance. That's under attractiveness. The way the exhibit looks doesn't come into balance.
So some things that would help with balance is, say you have an exhibit on something Canadian, it's helpful to have a Canadian flag in the exhibit somewhere, and it's helpful to show a map of Canada. You know, one of the more effective ways is to get a map back from the Dominion Bank. And it shows the map of Canada at the time, in Newfoundland. The time we were discussing still wasn't part of Canada, so it appropriately showed Newfoundland and Labrador as being a different country or colony. Other ways are putting in postcards of the mint that made the coin, a street scene showing the National Bank that issued a banknote, something patriotic. And when I look at balance personally, I say, okay, has he kept the related non-numismatic material, has he or she kept it down to say 25% or less, so it's not distracting me from the main point of the exhibit.
When I get finished reading an exhibit, if I feel like I've been drawn through the exhibit by the story, then I feel the balance is correct. I didn't have any problem with material that didn't seem to be germane or questions that didn't get answered.
So if an exhibit doesn't use its space evenly throughout, and in your mind, you could, you have in one case it's way too crowded and in another it's too empty, then you make a comment under attractiveness and indicate that you need to even up the usage of space.
Another
Now, here's
example, an unbalanced exhibit was an exhibit about the history of the sovereign. That is the gold 1 pound piece that England minted for decades or for centuries. There was one sovereign in 2 cases of 10-point type. It was a very difficult exhibit to read. It belonged in a journal. It didn't belong on an exhibit floor.
So the badges, which should have been described, somebody had a very nice exhibit of A&A ladies badges, but there was no descriptive text. And there's an interesting story behind all of those, which are very rare, that the exhibitor failed to earn the points because a couple of the judges that read it had no idea how rare the stuff was, and the story wasn't told. That's not, so the judges rightfully took some points off because they weren't going to go research how rare the stuff was. That's the exhibitor's job, not the judges. So if you're uncertain as a judge, typically you might take a point or two off on the material aspect just because and then make the exemplar comment. You need to tell us more about these.
Another example on badges was a gorgeous exhibit of fraternal jewelry at Fun, probably 15 years ago now, but not a single word about what each one of those items was, not even what organization issued it or what it was for. Nothing. Is, fabulous material, but no story there whatsoever. Completeness. Everything is needed to support the title and the statement of scope. Nothing more, nothing less. This should be a walkover because any competent judge, any competent exhibitor should be able to make the scope statement fit what's going to be shown. And if the scope statement promises more than is there, then you take off points for completeness. And if you overload the exhibit with stuff that's not germane to the scope, you also take off points for completeness. This is where we actually start at the top. We start with the 5 points because everyone should earn 5 points on completeness. They shouldn't be building an exhibit that promises something that they don't give or over delivers.
And then on the exemplar comments, the exhibitor set out to display a typeset of 20th century Mexico circulating coins. He omitted the gold coins, which were definitely circulating at least up until World War II. They didn't circulate a lot after the World War I, but they definitely circulated up to that time. So we took a couple points off because he forgot the gold coins. The next time we saw the exhibit, he added the 2 words non-gold, and that bought the guy 2 points. So when you look at it, so if you look at a typeset of coins and you're not real familiar, go find a catalog somewhere and make sure. And sadly, that guy got caught.
This was a criterion that was added at Tom Law's request, because Tom Law was one of these fellows who, if there were 3 coins known and 2 were in the Tower Mint collection, he owned the 3rd one, and he wanted credit for that. We decided we couldn't just give that element of difficulty credit. We also had to give a way for people who were showing state quarters to get credit, and we added new research. So there's ways to get points on difficulty that don't involve having rare material, but it can take a long time to put a collection together. Jerry Cockle discovered that a resident of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where he lived, had signed continental currency. And so he set out to collect an example of every piece that Adam Hubley had signed. It took him over 20 years to complete that collection. That's the degree of difficulty, it's dedication to collecting. We're measuring the collector ethic here. What is it about collectors that makes them gather, identify, classify, sort, and then teach about what it is that they collect?
So a good exhibitor, if they've been working on something for 10, 15, 20 years, they'll make a statement to that effect. This collection started in 2006 with a single coin, and it took 15 years to build it out. But they also say, they'll have a title card that might say new research, and they'll describe what things that are were not known to numismatists until the exhibit was constructed. And sometimes you have to be fairly explicit, because if you don't say new research by the exhibitor, it gets lost in the exhibit and you don't get the credit here. So to get to a real high level of degree of difficulty, you're going to have multiple rare pieces, something that's very difficult to put together because it's hard to find the material, and determine how to get new research on it, because the known literature on the topic is weak, and the material you're putting together, you have an aha moment. I can research my own material.
Now here we start with the 3 elements where we start at the bottom, 1 point, and then determine, to what extent does this exhibit demonstrate degree of difficulty. The guidance that you'll get in the emailed sheets covers these last 3 elements: degree of difficulty, rarity, and condition. And it shows the guidance that we're trying to get judges to use. As I said on the last slide, the collector's ethic is what we're measuring here. And the scores on this are not going to be extremely high. This knocked several points off of the average scores when it was introduced. Exhibitors have learned how to work with this now, so we do get elements of exhibits which are directed toward this criterion, because the exhibitors learn that you've got to show some degree of the collector's ethic to get points here.
And we read comments for the extremely high scores, because it feels really good as an exhibitor if the judges will make a comment, a lifetime of work. Wow. Good job.
There's some of the comments and some of the negative comments.
Okay, so the Franklin Mint material. Okay, normally the mintages aren't real high, but those are available as sets that can be pretty easily purchased off the internet any day of the week. Or another comment I had on one exhibit was, with the right checkbook, you could buy this exhibit at any convention. Because we don't look at the value of the material. But say, for instance, typeset of US gold coins, some of them get pricey, but it's not all that difficult to assemble. It may take time to get the right checkbook for it. On the other hand, collecting and displaying a set of 1820s bust half dollars by Overton variety, that can get to a really high level of difficulty because there are some very rare pieces there. One way that you can get high degree of difficulty is to discover something that is a new die pair variety. And Joe, I think, can give the best example is I believe a half die.
Yeah, that Kansas City, the year that we had National Money Show in Kansas City, there was an exhibit of a holed and bent and irregularly worn half dime. It was irregularly worn because it continued to circulate after it was bent. But the guy was able to show that it was a previously unreported die pair, which made it unique. It's the only one known. So you got points for rarity and points for condition. It's the best possible condition available to collectors, and points for degree of difficulty for the research that showed that in fact was a previously unknown die pair. Now, people who don't collect by die pair, who are not telling the story about the die pairs, would not get very many points for that coin because of its condition, and it's just an ugly coin. But the story he told hit all the points, hit everything it needed to be hit to maximize the points here at the bottom of the rating sheet. Best reasonably available. Now, I personally don't put much stock in the difference between an MS-64 and an MS-67. They're both uncirculated. Unless the story, there was a recent exhibit on building a, all right, what do you call those sets at the grading companies? A registry set, building a registry set. And in that case, the difference between 64s and 67s becomes significant. But for the general public, it's imperceptible. They can't even see the difference between a 64 and a 67. So unless the story deals with those kinds of degrees of condition, I don't look for that kind of material, that kind of information when I'm grading on condition. I'm just looking to see what might I be able to acquire of this kind of material in a condition better than what the exhibitor is showing. And if there's not much out there that's better, then maximum points or near maximum points are appropriate.
So you get in the national banknotes. There's one exhibit that's out there that's got a apparent VG10 with a corner missing, but it's the only note known for the bank. That's a textbook 10, where that would average in with the other material on the exhibit. So there's 17 banknotes. That one would get averaged out as a 10, and in your mind's eye view, you come up with a number for the whole exhibit based on the number of notes known and what you know about the conditions for which the exhibitor may state a lot. It's very difficult to find one of these that's not damaged.
I judged an exhibit in Albuquerque several years ago of Lincolniana, gorgeous material dealing with Lincoln, metals, coins, and notes. The only note he had in there was a $5 silver certificate with Lincoln's portrait. And it was at best a fine. It didn't fit in with all the rest of the stuff he had. I took off a point for condition because it was easily upgradable. And I made the comment, get a better looking $5 bill. You know, this piece stands out as not fitting in with all the rest of the stuff you're showing.
Okay. So there is one other example where you would give a 9 or a 10, and that is if the exhibitor's scope is to show a progression set of coins, and there's an exhibit out there of $3 gold coins where he goes from 4-1 to, I believe, Mint State 67. So at that point, you take a look at each of the coins and make a determination as to whether the coins are properly graded, and if they are, that should get to a 9 or a 10, not to a 5. The second example is, I'm trying to think what the second example was. It just crossed my mind. It's called an everyman set. And then there's also world's worst set. An everyman set in the set registry world, you strive to get to an AU 58 plus or a 58 star. So in that scope, your condition's a 9 or a 10 if almost all the coins are 58. And nothing lower than, say, a 55. That takes a lot of work to find those coins. So in a Barber series of coinage, finding 58s is harder than finding 62s. I joked around with a deceased friend that he should buy a 62 and put it in his pocket for a couple of weeks and then send it back in. He didn't do it because he didn't want to ruin history, but it took him a while to find a coin.
There's another exhibit, I believe it's 1901 Morgan dollars, which is a progression set. And looking at that, you can see the inconsistency of the people who put these things into slabs. You know, you look at the numbers on the slab, you look at the coin, and you can see where a coin with a higher number has a lower, has more wear, you know, a lower condition, but it got a higher number when you're talking about in the, you know, fine through very fine or extremely fine. Trying to hit every number in that range where numbers are awarded. The exhibitor showed graphically the inconsistency that the grading companies are, you know, unable to make these things consistent with logic. So again, we start with 1 point. Those Carson City dies were dumped into an outhouse. And a century later, that outhouse was excavated, and those canceled dies were found buried in the residue of what had been in that outhouse and got into the collector market. That example is of something that actually exists. So here are some comments that you might make under condition. And now we get to rarity. This was 10 points, and it was causing a lot of grief among US collectors. And when we introduced this, we said, well, you know, US coins compete with US coins, and therefore everybody's on the same playing field. But that only pertains to the World's Fair of Money. At the National Money Show, all of the classes are topical classes. So US coins aren't only competing with other US coins, they're competing with lots of other stuff. And US coins generally are minted in such large numbers that using the rating sheet, the rarity scale that we had with our 2018 guidance, they were being disadvantaged in that competition. So we have changed the scale and we've reduced the points. So the rarity is not such a killer on material when it's being shown against dissimilar material in the same kinds of storylines. So in National Money Show classes, we have things like history and economics and science and the arts, and any kind of material can be shown in any of those classes. And it's the story being told that determines what class they go into. So by reducing the points on rarity and expanding the table that we use for awarding those points, we're giving a break to the exhibitors of material which are made in the hundreds of millions in quantity. And again here, the value of the pieces is not germane. The exhibitor can advise that's not pertaining to the value, that's pertaining to the number of pieces known to exist, how difficult it was to find the piece, something along that line. Again, we start with 1 point, and the points are awarded based on the single rarest piece in the exhibit. We're not averaging rarity across the exhibit. So if there's a unique piece in there, it gets the 5 points. If there's a piece that's only 3 known, I believe our table is going to show the same. The table is going to be on the next slide here. The rarity scale provided to judges to determine the appropriate points. There's the table. So anything up to 10 known is going to get 5 points. And it goes up by orders of magnitude. 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, etc. So that's the guidance that we are now using and wanting judges to apply to the rarity element.
And the reason why we say known or available is particularly precious metal coinage, and even more particularly in banknotes, that there's a very high level of attrition. So the exhibitor may make a statement indicating that 99% of the object no longer exists, or that the survival rate's 1%, and then you can take a, and they can make, they can make the observation that a high percentage might have been 10,000, of which less than 1% survives, and sales data say there might have been 8 or 10 sales in the last 50 years. It gets you up into the 4 or 5 point range just on that one object. I have seen one of my exhibits where I showed 2 pieces where there was only 1 known, and 2 additional ones where there are 2 known, and somehow somebody still only gave it a 4. So there's still some work to do on calibration. Here's the exemplar comments. Every once in a while you say, well, I've never seen that material before. And then one observant judge went and got a reference out, probably from Google, and identified that the exhibitor had misstated the rarity of something as a R8 when it should have been an R3.
Well, this predates Google, that comment.
Okay.
That's how long ago Greenslet wrote his Franklin Metal book.
Wow.
Okay, do we have any questions, Paula?
I'm looking at the question list, Joe, and I don't have anything that's been typed in. So why don't we give people a couple minutes to type in their questions?
Hey there, sorry, I was managing a fire. I don't see any new questions.
I don't
Pop it up.
either. I'm reading them, and none of them pertain to the content.
Yep, that was
Okay, and then Odette just added a comment saying, thank you for a very thorough presentation. You're quite welcome, Odette.
Yeah, number 4 just popped in.
Gary Lewis, thank you for the presentation. Thank you for attending, Gary.
awesome. Thank you guys for doing this. I do want to let everybody know that it will be put up. It will be provided. It's been recorded. Sorry. And it will be provided up on our website. So,
This would be for apprentices, and it would normally show, you know, where and when we're going to be giving them their results back. But none of that pertains to this particular presentation.
great.
I see, yeah, okay, it's working.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much for taking your time to present.
You're quite welcome.
I hope everybody has a great day.